I just got done watching 24 movies at Sundance Film Festival, so today we're going to be going down and ranking every single one from worst to best. I definitely want to hear your guys' thoughts down below in the comment section. Did you attend Sundance? Did you not? Are you excited for some of these movies? Let me know down below. But let's get into this ranking right now. Coming up first is my number 24 and 23, and the reason that they're kind of mushed together at the bottom is because sadly I had technical difficulties during these films, and I personally do not feel comfortable giving these a rating due to the amount of technical difficulties I had watching these at home, and that is Murder in Bighorn as well as The Accidental Getaway Driver. What I had watched of both of them, I quite liked, but then some of the audio was a little bit screwy on the digital version that I watched at home, and sadly, I just did not have enough time to go back and try and fix it or rewatch it. So with that said, I'm looking forward to finally watching these when they come out. I know Murder in Bighorn is going to be premiering on Showtime, and I know The Accidental Getaway Driver, who knows when I'll be able to see that, but for the most part, you should keep these ones in your mind. Really starting out this list, at my number 22 is Eileen. This was easily my least favorite film of the entire festival, starring the likes of Thomas and Mackenzie and Anne Hathaway. That was the reason that I got sucked into this. The second the movie started, I'm like, this is awesome. It's like a nice little crime noir throwback, but the movie really isn't a crime noir till later on. It definitely pictures itself as a coming-of-age story for one girl kind of coming into her own and having a crush on this person, and it's Thomas and Mackenzie having a crush on Anne Hathaway and how that relationship starts to unfold. Now, it's about an hour and 40 minutes or so. It's a little bit short of a film, and I found the movie really lost itself in the back half. There's a mic drop, per se, that when it happened, I went, oh shit. Sadly, as the film continued, I don't feel like they earned the ending, and overall it feels like a lot of different ideas, but nothing that really mixed and matched too well. I like the performances, but that's about it. 21 now is Birth, Rebirth. Now this is coming to Shudder. This is a cool spin on the Frankenstein story. The less you know, the better. And honestly, my biggest issue with this one was just the pacing. I thought for what the concept was, it was way different than what I expected. It definitely is not just blood and guts, Frankenstein monster coming to life. No, it is a little bit more deeply emotional. I just actually wish they would have dove into a little bit more of the characters itself. Besides the performances, I found the characters to be a little bit one-dimensional. It's not a bad movie. It's just kind of a fine one. Now, my number 20 is All Dirt Roads Taste Like Salt. This was one of my most anticipated for the entire festival, and I don't know if I was just very exhausted when I had watched it, or in general if the movie was just not for me. It's a very meditative, poetic film about kind of the day in the life type of cycle. And honestly, I love those type of movies, but there's something about this one, whether it was the pacing or again my exhaustion, that really didn't latch me on to everything that I wanted this film to be. I think this is one that I definitely do need to check back out. That's why it's not at the very bottom of this list, but I would still say as a directorial feature, it is very daring for what they tried to do with this one, but overall, its non-linear style wasn't for my cup of tea, but I understand if you did love it. And my number 19 is Shortcomings. Now, this one I actually think is a good directorial debut from Randall Park. I've been a pretty big fan of his every time he shows up in something, and overall, in this movie, there's a lot of fun to be had. The problem with this movie, I don't even know if it's a problem, but the hardest part about this film is the fact that it follows a character that is absolutely unlikable. But there's an interesting aspect about that, is because you continue to want to see the rest of the story. It's more of a character study on one guy, but centered around as a comedy, and we don't see a lot of those, in my opinion. Every time we see a character study, it's not really in the vein of a comedy, and I think what Randall Park actually did here was quite unique from a directing standpoint. My issue with this movie, and the reason it's a little bit lower on this list, is mostly just to do with the script. But besides that, I enjoyed this one. I think maybe some other people will as well. Now, my number 18 is The Polite Society. This one's coming out around April, and it's honestly the most outrageous film I saw in all film festivals in quite a bit. It kind of reminds me of Scott Pilgrim, but has a little bit more culture to it. I love the design, and in general, the kind of vibe that it was giving to it. But that outrageous nature sometimes hits some dull points throughout the story, and I actually wish a lot more of the film was like the third act of the movie. It feels like each act was progressively getting better and better, thankfully, but what I really wanted from this movie was the entire film to be that outrageous tone, because there's some stuff in the middle point that's just very dull, but besides that, good performances, good action, a lot of fun. At my number 17 is The Pod Generation, starring the likes of Chiwetel Ejiofor and Emilia Clarke, playing people who are gonna have a baby in a little pod. It's like a new way in the sci-fi future that people have kids. Now, this is completely Twilight Zone meets Black Mirror. Just more sci-fi-ish, and not as dark, just more kind of, I guess comedic, but also like dramatic at the same time. There's a lot of interesting ideas that this film actually throws out there about childbirth and sci-fi, and in general, our attachment and our obsession with technology and trying to further out the development of there's a lot of conversation in this movie. The only reason it's a little bit lower on this list, it's not because we didn't get great performances, because Emilia Clarke and Chiwetel Ejiofor are great in here. I just wanted a little bit more after looking back on the entire ending itself. I feel like there's a little bit more lacking from that department, but, you know, what am I to say? Number 16 is Fairyland. This movie is quite an emotional rush. It's about a father and a daughter story, and the father turns out that he's gay, and it's the daughter trying to really much show her memoir of growing up with her gay father. And honestly, there's a lot of emotional avenues in there, specifically in the 80s and 90s that it takes place during too, specifically as it touches into the AIDS pandemic and what that was really going about later on in the movie. And for me, one of the things that actually stuck out to me the most in this was Scott McNeary's performance. I think this guy always shows up as like background actors, and he's always great in like those side role performances, but to finally see him get like a leading role was fantastic. Amelia Jones as his daughter is also phenomenal. I really think this movie is one of those touching aspects that's going to touch people in different sorts of places and absolutely enjoy. It was a heartwarming story, but it was something that I've seen before. Speaking of things that I've seen before, at my number 15 is A Little Prayer. Now this movie worked for me and it kind of didn't. The reason it's a little bit higher on this list and more in the middle is because it's kind of something I've seen before. It's heartwarming. I liked how subtle and good it was, specifically in the way that it unravels its story and its characters, because you think it's going one way and then it actually takes a left turn. And this is kind of, again, one of those movies that really centers on all of its characters. Every character has something to say. Jane Levy's great in here. David Strathairn, who plays her father-in-law and just in general the father of his entire family, was hands down the best aspect of this and probably gave top 5 performances of the entire festival. 14 was the final film I got to see at Sundance, and that's called Landscaping with Invisible Hands. Now, out of all the videos, this is actually the one I did not do a full long review for yet. Part of that is because I actually think they're going to change the title of this movie. The title is absolutely trash, but this is directed by Corey Finley, who did Thoroughbreds, a film that I quite liked, and Landscaping with Your Invisible Hands actually has a lot of unique premise. It's an alien film, but it's an alien invasion movie that is not what you expected, and I think for the unique and betterness of it. Tiffany Haddish is fantastic in it, specifically as their mother. The main character of this is played by Ashanti Black, and honestly, for me, I thought he was superb as this, pretty much playing a child who wants to help his mother pay her bills. Because after these aliens arrive, they start buying up all the property, and only the wealthy are the ones that are actually getting away and really much being able to live. Big fan of alien movies, like I mentioned, and I like the nice twist on this entire genre. But for me, the thing that was most cool and unique for this was the unique high concept aspects of alien invasion, and not just being like, these aliens are coming down to kill us. No, it actually has something to say about wealth, generational aspects, culture, and all those sorts of things. And while it gets a little bit messy towards the back half, specifically in probably the last 25 minutes, I left this movie going, there's a lot of stuff to kind of chew on there, and I think as well, it's a unique film. And if anything of that nature, it was worth seeing for that. At my number 13 is You Hurt My Feelings, starring the likes of Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Tobias Menzies, who plays a lovely couple who loves each other so much, but it turns out, you know, he might not like his wife's new book. And this kind of is one of those great little date movies that actually might start an argument, but at the same time might also bring you together in a unique way, because it finds that balance of telling a lie to support your wife or your loved one, but also how can you be honest with them at the same time but still be supportive. And I'm sure a lot of different couples or a lot of different relationships have gone through that, because it doesn't just focus on that relationship, it focuses on their child's relationship as well and the son that they have. I found this movie to be quite funny and a lot of fun. I just wish it was a little bit more developed, but what I can say is that the director Nicole Holton Center's script and direction here is actually some of the strongest aspects of the movie. Again, I just wish the film was a little bit longer. At my number 12 is probably like one of the most mixed movies, but I really liked it, and it's called Cat Person. This is directed by Susan Fogler. And at my number 12 is Cat Person. This also stars Emilia Jones and Nicholas Braun, who's from apparently Succession, which I've never seen personally, but a lot of people love. And I don't even really know what to say about this movie. This movie's weird. I know a lot of people who actually hated this movie. I quite liked it for what it was, and specifically what it was trying to say towards modern dating today and the nightmare aspects that it can be for women. Because literally the film opens up with a quote that says, "Men are afraid of women laughing at them, women are afraid of men killing them." And that's honestly the truth, because as you see through here, a lot of this takes place from Emilia Jones's perspective, and all of her anxiety kind of building up to what can this guy possibly be, and who can he be. And once you start to find out more things, overall, I found this to be actually a realistic depiction of how a lot of women probably feel in these sorts of escapes. And I really liked Emilia Jones, specifically in one scene that the director, Susan Fogel, decided to do in a very unique manner that actually brought to life probably what a girl and many women have actually thought before in their lives. But what I thought and captured the most right here was just how nightmarish dating can be at times. And even though the last 30 minutes kind of goes a little bit too big for my bridges, I still like this one, and I would heavily recommend it. At my number 11 is Radical. This is based on a true story about a Hispanic teacher who pretty much tries to change his students' lives. And as someone who's had teachers that changed my lives, this kind of was just a love letter to those teachers, and specifically features an amazing performance. If you're someone who just loves heartwarming stories and wants to have your heart tugged at a lot of different strings, this is the movie for you. We're rounding into my top 10, and I just want to remind you guys, if you are new here and you like talking movies, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, as well as comment down below your guys' thoughts. Did you attend Sundance virtually, in person, or did you get to check out any of these movies? Let me know down below. At my number 10 is 1001. Now, this is one of those movies I was putting off because I knew it was going to be a heartbreaking, emotional journey. And honestly, it was one of those ones that will shatter your heart, specifically from the mic drop in the third act that actually makes you change and view the entire story you just saw completely different, because it's about a mother who kidnaps her son from foster care and tries to give him the life that he deserved. Now, the mother is played by Tiana Taylor, who's an amazing singer, but I did not know she could act, and she's great in this. But as well as, I honestly found that the husband of the story, William Calvert, brought a lot of charm to everything else. And also Josiah Cross, once he finally comes in, because the kid ages, does take over a big time span. I found that when Josiah came in, the whole film really centered around him, and the heart of the story was his. Honestly, there is a lot of emotion to this story, but one that I really appreciated. At my number 9 is Infinity Pool, and if you're watching this, this is actually in theaters as of today. This is Brandon Cronenberg's brand new movie. I have no idea how the version I saw at Sundance could even be in theaters, because there's some pornographic things in here. But this is a movie that actually, the more I sit on, the more that I like, even with some of my issues towards the back half, where I wish some items were a little bit not better explained, but more just touched on per se. Because imagine you can go to a country, commit a crime, but if you have the money, you could do something to get away with it and continue to do that. And I'm sure that is something that Brandon Cronenberg was able to speak on here, specifically in the way that it depicts how wealthy and powerful people get away with crimes every day. Life cycle of doing this over and over again. There's a twist, and I'm trying to be vague on it. There's a twist of how they get away with it. Every single time they did it, I honestly found it to be unique. This is a very dire, graphic, gory, and at the same time provocative movie, but it's one that I could not stop thinking about. Mia Goth is phenomenal in this, and I honestly think Alexander Skarsgård might turn in one of my favorite performances from him. I still love The Northman more, though. At my number 8 is still a Michael J. Fox documentary. Now, this is going to be coming to Apple TV soon. I don't think there's a release date for this yet, but what I will say is that as someone who loved Back to the Future, that very first one, and honestly liked a lot of Michael J. Fox growing up, this is a love letter to him. You know, it's his entire life up until he had gotten Parkinson's, and even diving into how that changed his life forever and how he dealt with that in the early stages. And it is heartbreaking, it's emotional, it's funny, and at the same time, it's exactly what you would expect from a Michael J. Fox documentary. I was surprised by how much heart was in this, and the fact that it's so high up on my list should say something, because documentaries are not my style, but this one was. And now at my number 7 is Theater Camp. This, out of every movie I saw here, is the most surprising film I saw, and I say that because I'm not a theater kid. I never went to theater camp. I love movies, but I didn't know how this was going to adapt for me, and I honestly only got it because I just needed another film to flesh out on here. And what a hilarious movie this was, starring the likes of like Molly Gordon, Ben Platt, and a whole other bunch of names. This is based on a short film that I've never seen, but I wish this was not a movie. I wish this was like a show, like The Office or Abbott Elementary, because I wanted more time with all these characters. I wanted more time with these scenarios. It's absolutely, every single scene is hilarious from top to bottom. I think Searchlight just bought the movie for like $8 million. What a steal. If you love mockumentaries, if you love comedies, and if you're a fan of theater, because this is also a love letter to theater kids, you will love this. And I say this as someone who is not a theater kid, who did not grow up going to theater camp. And there's a character for you in here that I'll just leave it at that. When you see her, you'll be like, oh, I know her, because she kind of got a little bit famous over from the bear that just happened. But I really enjoyed this movie, and I was surprised by it. And also talk about another surprise. At my number 6 is Young, Wild, Free. And this stars Algie Smith and Sierra Capri, one that you might have seen in Euphoria, another one that you might have seen on My Block, and they are stellar in this, as kind of this own Bonnie and Clyde adventure that we kind of get taking place in the hood, and seeing how a kid grows up trying to take care of his own mother, and as well as his siblings who maybe don't have the best life. But how does this kind of revolve around with mental illness, and how does she infect his life and kind of change it for the better? I liked this movie up until this thing happens. And when this thing happens, to a certain extent, it's a little bit thin on plot. That's the truth. It's a little bit thin. But when it happens, it made me look back and I knew something was different. And the more I think about this movie, I loved the style on it. I love how it all comes together, and I truly think Famby Banks' direction here is actually some of the strongest aspects that I've seen at Sundance from a director. I loved this movie. I have no idea when this will come out. I have no idea when anyone else will be able to see it, but I cannot recommend it enough. My top 5 is Fair Play. This movie was just bought out by Netflix, starring the likes of Phoebe from Bridgerton, which a lot of people are fans of, and Alden Ehrenreich. And this probably had the sharpest and best script that I saw at all of Sundance. And actually talking on a personal level of films being made, Fair Play probably is the best made film that I saw at Sundance, besides one other, which we'll talk about soon. I just found this, a lot of people are kind of saying it's an exotic thriller, but I would say it's more of a dramatic thriller, if any sense, because it's about a couple who is not supposed to be dating, ends up getting engaged. They both work at the same office, and one of them gets promoted, and a lot of, well, drama starts to happen from there. That might sound boring to you, but this is actually one of the most uncomfortable and honestly thrilling, dramatic thrillers that I've seen since Uncut Gems. You will be on the edge of your seat the entire way through. And at my number 4 now is Sometimes I Think About Dying. Thank God for this film, because this stars Daisy Ridley, and she gives such an amazing performance in a film that takes place all really much in an office cubicle in a very quiet town about a girl who sometimes thinks about killing herself and dying and all sorts of ways of that, because it is boring to work in an office cubicle. And honestly, as someone who does work in an office cubicle, there was a lot that I could relate to in this movie, and I loved it. I love this movie. The more and more I think about it, the more that I love the depiction of how they actually examine this character. Her character itself does really much have a lot of issues when it comes down to panic attacks, and honestly seeing a representation of what a panic attack feels like is in this movie. Social anxiety is a major thing, and the nightmares of being an introvert in an office where everyone is an extrovert. In a way, it's kind of a horror movie, but in the same way, it's kind of just one of those day-in-the-life movies that I honestly pleasantly thought was great. My number 3 is actually the one that was at my number 1 for quite a while until I really started thinking about everything else, and I saw another film on my last day. But at my number 3, it's Magazine Dreams, starring Jonathan Majors, who I will still contend gave the best performance out of every movie I saw at Sundance. Female, male, it doesn't matter. Jonathan Majors gave the most powerful and striking performance. A film that mixes the likes of Nightcrawler, Taxi Driver, and Whiplash within the obsession of becoming an amateur weightlifter and how that kind of goes. The magazine dreams that Jonathan Majors sees in the light and that what he wants really tackles a lot of different elements. This is not an easy movie to watch. It is a very uncomfortable and hard film to watch, but it is one that is absolutely rewarding, and I cannot recommend this movie enough. It's not going to be for everyone, but I damn near loved it. My number 2 is actually the movie that I have sat on probably the longest, and the more I think about it, the more I love. A24 just bought this movie from the YouTubers Raka Raka, who finally got to do their directorial debut, and it is awesome, and that is Talk to Me. This is about a bunch of teenagers who actually end up finding an embalmed hand. An embalmed hand is a severed hand, pretty much, and they find out that if they touch it and say, "Talk to me," they can see and talk to ghosts. But as they do that, they get this drug-like feeling, but they can only do it for a few seconds, and if they go over it, dire consequences could happen. This is a movie that I expected. If you've ever seen Raka Raka before, their videos are very graphic and entertaining, but high energy. I was expecting that same thing kind of here. I was expecting more Evil Dead than anything like that, with humor and blood and guts, and that is not this movie. Don't get me wrong, there's blood and guts in here. There's a lot of gore, and there's a lot of great prosthetics, and a lot of practical effects. And the fact that A24 bought this movie, if they market it right, this could be like their Barbarian that does really well at the theaters. I know X and Pearl do good, and I know a lot of A24 horror films do good, but this could be like that next big hit. The thing that I loved so much about Talk to Me, though, was that it wasn't just another Evil Dead. It actually did feel relative to today. And if you've watched The Babadook, which is also an Australian horror film, Talk to Me is that same vein. You can feel the tone of The Babadook mixed with like our generations of flatliners, and I loved it. I honestly, I cannot wait to watch this movie again. It's freaky, it's gory, it's highly entertaining, it's very emotional, and Sophia Wilde is absolutely great. This is a movie you watch, and then in 10 years, you're going to be like, holy shit, that was their directorial debut. Look at them now. But at my number 1 for all of Sundance 2023, it is Rye Lane. This is premiering on Hulu March 31st, and what a generational, great romantic comedy we have here that just takes place in the day in the life in South London. 2 people go through a breakup, and they pretty much share their experiences along the way. I was genuinely surprised by how heartwarming this movie was. I've seen so many movies like this where it's just 2 characters and not much happens, but because of an amazing script, great cinematography, and overall great direction and performances, you really come to feel for them. And one thing that I was so blown away by was I completely forgot that I was sitting in my room. I completely forgot that I was sitting in my room watching it on TV. I actually felt like I was along for the ride with them. A lot of that is thankfully because of the director, Rain Miller, and what she was able to do within this movie, specifically in the framing of the shots and the cinematography and the lenses that they decided to use, but also because of the performances like David Johnson and Vivian Opera, who I think really centers and brings around this entire story. And for me, as someone who is in love and is engaged, the thing I loved the most about this movie was the way that it kind of displays like how actual love and how connections really do further out. They kind of have a great commentary on how Tinder and Bumble and all these other dating apps are crap. But that true meaning and connection that you can really feel with someone sometimes just happens at the most random and off-put places. And that's when true love can actually settle in. And I love the whole message that Rye Lane really had to it. And I overall love this movie. It was my favorite film from Sundance Film Festival and was the only film I did give an A+ to. So with that said, guys, that is my ranking of all 24 films I saw at Sundance Film Festival. Make sure to leave your thoughts down below. Hit that like and subscribe button. And of course, until next time, stay classy.